And welcome to the first in what will be a series called Quickfire for the subscribers. I'm creating this to follow an episodic format, which will look at and analyse various aspects of the Scottish Government's independence papers that are being published. The goal is each episode will examine in detail a specific aspect of the documents, and all of them together will add up to create a macro overview of all the different detailed parts. The first one today I want to examine is 2 points that are very closely connected, and it won't require us getting past the first page actually of the documents that have been published in July this month. One, what is the SNP's sovereignty claim? What is their view of sovereignty? And secondly, connected to it, what implications does this mean for their references to the European Union, Brexit? We need to leave the United Kingdom because of a democratic deficit taken out of the EU against our will. We're going to explore all of this today. And when we do so, a number of things will become clear. One, the SNP's view of sovereignty is antithetical to a Europeanist, a pro-European person's view of sovereignty. Two, the SNP have always viewed the European question as a rhetorical and political weapon to obtain independence, and their commitment to it is skin deep. And thirdly, that there's a serious lack of honesty from the Scottish National Party in specific form about independence question connected to the European question. We're going to look at all of this in relation to what they're publishing. So let us begin at the start with this, Renewing Scotland's Democracy, published on the Scottish Government's website. It's part of their pro-independence paper publication series, published not that long ago, this very month. So what we're interested in is starting with this. The only way Scotland can ensure decisions are taken in the best interests of its people is with independence. Now, this is fascinating because of how revealing it is. What this opening sentence tells us is the main idea for the SNP and independence. What it's telling us is what their concept of sovereignty is. Their sovereignty claim is encompassed in this statement. What they're saying is their view of sovereignty is the mirror image, the exact same bosom buddy of what a Brexiteer's view of sovereignty is. What do I mean, Dean? What on earth are you saying? Well, the only way the United Kingdom can ensure decisions are taken in the best interests of its people is with independence from the European Union. We could even just exchanging a few words, it sounds like a Brexiteer. But Dean, you're playing word games. Well, not really, because what we're really talking about here is the SNP are making a statement that their view of sovereignty is that we need to take power back from Westminster, back from London, i.e. we should not be sharing and pooling our sovereignty between Scotland, England, Wales, Northern Ireland. We should not be pushing our sovereignty up and out above the national level. We need to take back the levers of control. We need to take back our sovereignty and have it more locally based within our demos, restricted to the borders of our demos. And only then are we protecting our sovereignty. That is exactly a view of sovereignty that Brexiteers would actually share and agree with. So it's fascinating to see that that's the SNP's view of sovereignty. Now, some of us, as you can maybe see the flag there, in a past life, were pro-Europeanists, very pro-European. Now, declaration before I go forward. Some people who have been following my writings and various things on Twitter as well, social media, will say, hold on a minute, Dean. You were a strong advocate of getting Brexit delivered. Yes. And I see no conflict with that, and having been a very strong Remainer before the referendum. Because if you have a referendum, you're bound by the result. If an outcome is the way you like it to have been, if you're on the winning side, say 2014, and we stay in the UK, then good, great. I won that one, I got my way. I'll be bound by it. But if you're on the losing side, like in 2016, and you end up with Brexit, suck it up, have no gods before democracy, be bound by the result. Just because you lost doesn't give you the right to demand the loser's do-over. You're bound by results of referenda if you have them. I've never liked government by referenda, but if we have them, if you have plebiscites, you're bound by the results when you win or lose. Losers' consent is essential for democracy. It's how it works. So that was a declaration of contextual interest for all of you in relation to my stance over the years. But the SNP, in their document for independence, have proffered up the same argument for sovereignty, the need for independence on the basis of a sovereignty claim which matches the Brexiteer. Now, what would a pro-European say about sovereignty? Well, we would say something like this. In a globalized world economy, where we're ever more interconnected, and the European economy is increasingly a smaller actor as power, economic, political, national security rivalries, everything shifts more towards Asia Pacific. In order to protect our sovereignty as European members of the community or European countries per se, is by pooling and sharing our sovereignty, pushing up and pushing out above the nation state level. Just like we do at the UK between Scotland, England, Wales, Northern Ireland, you do that, you replicate it as far as possible at a European level too. It's a completely different concept of sovereignty from what the SNP are offering up in this document. In fact, they're antithetical to each other. And that should be noted, because the SNP will never admit or tell you that. Now, let us keep going. In the document in question, what we can see here is a very fascinating paragraph, a bullet point, sorry. Whether Scotland should be in the EU, devolution did not protect Scotland from being taken out of the EU against the clear views of the majority, 62% of the Scottish voters, in the 2016 referendum. So what it's saying here is raising this issue of the European Union, Brexit, necessitating the need for independence. Now, there is quite a considerable piece of context the SNP are ignoring that rather reframes how one might view the SNP's rhetoric on Brexit justifying or even necessitating independence. Let's start at the start. Let's start with what we know. In 2014, the SNP were arguing for independence in 2014. They were arguing that independence would not mean leaving the EU. That's what they were saying publicly. It would not mean leaving the EU. In fact, we could stay in the EU because of Article 48 of the European Union. What they were basically saying is Article 48 means that given there's no precedent of a European member state voting to split up, what that would mean is through Article 48, you could, by a treaty amendment, see Scotland stay in the EU. There's no reason why that couldn't happen. Now, that was what the SNP were saying right up until September 2014 when we voted in independence. But I'm going to show you why they were lying. Now, that's a big word, lie, but I can prove it. So let's demonstrate. Now, 2014, the SNP were arguing that, as we see here in the Scotland's Future Guide to an Independent Scotland, their publication at the time, they were saying, and they wrote in their white paper, there is, within the EU treaties, a legal framework by which Scotland, a country that has been an integral part of the European Union for 40 years, may make the transition to independent EU membership in that period between the referendum and the date on which Scotland becomes an independent state. Article 48 provides a suitable legal route, blah, blah, blah. So that's what they were saying to the Scottish people in 2014. Don't worry, you can vote for independence, doesn't mean voting for Skexit, Scottish exit from the European Union. But that wasn't true. In fact, from March 20th, 2014, the SNP knew that voting for independence would mean voting to leave the EU, that their rhetoric on Article 48 was bunkum. They were told this by the European Commission in correspondence. I'll show you the letter. Now, the letter exchange was this one. But before I show you it, let's just remind ourselves. September 2012, José Manuel Barroso, the then president of the European Commission, stated in 2012, a new state, third country, if it wants to join the European Union, has to apply to become a member state. So if you're a third country, you have to vote to reapply. Now, the SNP were arguing we would not be a third country because of Article 48, an amendment to treaty law. Now, very helpfully, what we had was Christina McKelvey, SNP MSP, at the time convener of the European and External Relations Committee of the Scottish Parliament. She wrote on March 10th to Viviane Reding, Vice President of the European Commission, asking, would for Article 48 actually apply? Is what the SNP is saying to the Scottish people at the time in 2014, is it true or not? Please tell us, European Commission. Well, they only had to wait 10 days, March 20th, 2014. They were told in very clear terms by the Vice President of the European Commission at the time, when part of the territory of a member state ceases to be part of that state, e.g., because that territory becomes an independent state, secedes from the member state, the treaties will no longer apply to that now independent territory. So no Article 48, as we might say in Mandarin, mayo. We don't have any. It is not true. There can be no voting budongs. Oh, I don't understand. We will not have any of that disingenuous nonsense. The SNP were told, 20th of March, 2014, Viviane Reding, Vice President of the European Commission, in other words, a new independent region would, by the fact of its independence, become a third country with respect to the European Union. So, despite the SNP arguing right up until the day of independence that, oh, independence does not necessarily mean leaving the EU. That was a pro-independence argument at the time. They knew the whole time that was not true. They knew voting for independence would mean voting to leave the EU. They were told that on March 20th. Article 48 would not apply. So when we read here, today, in 2022, the SNP arguing that we need independence because devolution did not protect Scotland from being taken out of the EU. Well, the SNP were happy to pay that price in 2014. They weren't prepared to tell you honestly, but they were prepared to actually know, fully cognizant in 2014 that voting for independence meant voting to leave the EU. They knew that. I just showed you the letter from the European Commission to Christina McKelvey. So this idea that, oh, devolution didn't protect us from leaving the EU thought SNP thought leaving the EU was a price worth paying if it meant obtaining independence. So this rhetoric rather rings hollow, but we can go a bit deeper, and please, why don't we? What is far more interesting, beyond the point that the SNP are being rather disingenuous about the relationship between independence and being a pro-European and Remainer, we can fast forward because in 2014, people were fully cognizant of the fact that we were voting to remain in the United Kingdom, knowing that there was a risk that we would end up with independence. We knew there was a risk of it. We were fully cognizant of it. Don't take my word for it. Why don't I show you the words of our First Minister at the time? Nicola Sturgeon was explicit at the time. Why don't I show you in her own words what she said? Because it's why you don't need me to tell you. Let me show you.
Alistair, you went on television on Sunday and in direct response to a question, you said you couldn't guarantee Scotland's continued membership of the European Union if we stayed as part of the UK because there's going to be an in-out referendum. We could find ourselves in the position. We can find ourselves in the position where the UK as a whole votes to come out and we vote to stay in and we get taken out against our will.
Fascinating, isn't it? Let's just replay that bit there.
As part of the UK, because there's going to be an in-out referendum.
Nicola Sturgeon just said there's going to be an in-out referendum. We were all fully cognizant when we voted to remain in the United Kingdom in 2014 that we were doing so knowing that we might end up with Brexit, sadly, in my opinion, but for many people happily. But the point is, we were fully cognizant. We were aware. Nicola Sturgeon herself was on television telling us, hey, we might end up with Brexit if we vote to remain in the United Kingdom. We voted to remain by 55% to 45% in the United Kingdom, knowing that we might end up with Brexit in the future. But let's keep going.
We could find ourselves in the position. We can find ourselves in the position where the UK as a whole votes to come out and we vote to stay in and we get taken out against our will.
Taken out against our will, Miss Sturgeon says. Now, I've just showed you. Nicola Sturgeon, March 20th, 2014, was quite happy to see us taken out of the EU, if that was the price that had to be paid for independence. So for her to then be on national television subsequently saying, oh, well, Scotland might be taken out of the EU against its will by London, rather undercut the whole history of the fact the SNP knowingly argued for independence, knowingly arguing for Scottish Skexit at the time. That completely undercuts any moral outrage that, or any indignance that the SNP are now claiming about the injustices of a 2016 EU referendum. But let's keep going. Let's keep going. We've heard a lot more of this.
Thank you very much. Through all of this, I am determined, utterly determined, to protect Scotland's relationship with and our place in the European Union.
She said that 2016, June 28th. But March 20th, 2014 onwards, she was arguing for independence, meaning we would have to leave the EU. So much for her determination to protect Scotland's place in the EU. She wanted us to leave the EU as the price to be paid for her independence obsession. So let us have no more of this rhetoric by the SNP about the necessity of independence today because of the injustices of a 2016 referendum on Brexit, because she told us at the time, if you vote to remain in the United Kingdom, you might end up with Brexit. 55% of us voted to remain in the United Kingdom, fully cognizant of that risk. The SNP do not get to then take our vote, my vote, anyone's vote to remain in the United Kingdom, and take out my vote to remain in the EU and then try and play a game with it and say, well, your vote to remain in the EU means you now suddenly want independence or think there's now a mandate to revisit the question. Not at all. It's all the more so when Nicola Sturgeon and the SNP themselves argued that independence was a price, that leaving the European Union was a price worth paying for independence. So much for her protecting our place in the European Union in 2016. She was certainly not interested in doing so in 2014. That's an important piece of context, as today we now have the SNP arguing that devolution did not protect Scotland from being taken out of the EU. The SNP wanted us to be taken out of the EU. It was the price to be paid for their independence. We have the correspondence that demonstrates that. But let's keep going. There's a little bit more to say on this question. What we now know is that the SNP are predicating their concept of sovereignty. They're couching it in terms that are antithetical to a pro-European concept of national sovereignty. Pro-European says you share and pool your sovereignty, you pull it up above the national unit, you spread it out. Globalized world, interconnected economy and technology, it's the way you protect your sovereignty. It's very similar to a unionist argument to maintaining the union here at home in the British Isles. In fact, a pro-union argument is very similar, if not the same in fundamental terms, to a pro-European argument and being a remainer in the European Union. They mirror each other. And on the question of national sovereignty, in the same way as a pro-independence argument for Scotland, mirror images are Brexiteer view of sovereignty. So the SNP's sovereignty claim is antithetical to any pro-union, pro-European Union sentiment. That's just a fact. And secondly, the SNP's sudden discovery about the democratic deficit of devolution, failing to protect our position in the European Union, is less principle and more opportunistic. Because they knew from March 20th, 2014, voting for independence meant voting to leave the European Union. The Article 48 trick of an amendment to retain Scotland in the Union would not apply. Vice President of the Union Commission told them that would be a third country, would have to reapply. They just didn't bother admitting it to the Scottish people. With the white paper all the way up until we voted in September 2014, they continued to peddle the lie. And they knew it was a lie from the 20th of March 2014 with that correspondence with Christina McKelvey and Viviane Reding. The Article 48 would somehow mean we could stay in the EU even with independence. They peddled the lie. They knew independence meant leaving the EU, not protecting Scotland's place in it, leaving it. The SNP weren't bothered. After all, their concept of sovereignty clashes with the EU, a pro-Europeanist's view of sovereignty anyway. So the SNP's rhetoric today about democratic deficits and pro-European sentiment is hollow. It's clothing of convenience. And I think that proper context should be fully understood by everyone as we live through the Groundhog Day of the First Minister arguing that she's determined to protect our place in the European family of nations. Ms. Sturgeon, I've campaigned to remain in the European Union for the same reasons I campaigned to remain in the United Kingdom, because I am not a nationalist and I don't have a nationalist view of national sovereignty. You don't get to take my vote to remain in the European Union, twist it up to try and leverage a justification for a loser's do-over for the independence referendum. Unlike you, I'm not a sore loser. I was on the winning side of the 2014 referendum. Good, that makes me happy. I was on the losing side of the 2016 referendum. That made me very unhappy. But there can be no gods before democracy. and we must have losers' consent. And Brexit has to be seen to have been delivered and actually delivered on the basis that A, we voted to remain in the United Kingdom, fully aware, thanks to you warning us on the Alistair Carmichael debate on STV, I showed the clip, fully aware, fully cognizant. The voting to remain in the United Kingdom meant voting to remain, knowing that we could end up with Brexit anyway. That's a fact that you cannot escape from. We were fully aware. There is no shock. There is no change of circumstance. And your determination to protect our place in the European Union today is about as truthful as your argument that Article 48 meant we didn't have to leave the European Union in 2014. Smoke and mirrors, as always, from this Scottish government. But that ends the first episode of Quickfire. The next episode will dig into more detail about devolution, this argument of a democratic deficit here constitutionally at home. And we'll examine more of that in the next episode of Quickfire. But for this one, we'll draw it to a conclusion. I'll bid you adieu for now and hope that this has been somewhat illuminating in framing the context behind the SNP's sudden discovery of pro-European sentiment, which is rather hollow and opportunistic. Thank you.